I want to talk to you today about something that I've been thinking about for a few years now. Essentially, how do we live an interesting, purposeful, meaningful, fulfilling life? It's a huge question, and it's something that I've done a lot of reading about, and I've been really purposeful going out and trying to find answers to it. It's taken me to all sorts of bizarre places, and I found the other day that I was looking through my notes that I'd taken over the years, and I was trying to draw together some different video ideas because I want to get this channel back on the road again. And this was a clear theme that stuck out for me, was how do we live a life that is full of richness, full of variety and joy and fulfillment? How do we live a life of shared experiences? How do we live a life of good, purposeful, meaningful work? How do we live a life that enriches our commons by our very presence in it? And as I began to draw together these different threads and make some notes on my notes and my reading, I started to come up with three main things that I think are absolutely essential if we're to begin this intentional process of developing a good life. Efficiency would be there. Intention is the second thing, and attention is the third thing. And today in this video, what I'm going to do is talk through each of those. I'm going to give you some examples of how people have developed these in their lives, and then we're going to look at three really practical ways at the end of the video where we can really work our way through those three different areas. So we start with efficiency, and to me efficiency is maybe not the most interesting and compelling of those three ideas, but it's something that without being efficient in the way that we do things, I don't think we can really expect to have the time in our lives to be able to be intentional and to be able to pay lots of attention. There is limited time, like, not to be morbid, but there is limited time in our lives. There's limited time in our day, our week, our month, our semester. However we divide up time, we're always playing against the clock. We're always going to be competing to make sure that we're using our time efficiently if we have clear goals in mind, if we have a type of life or something that we want to achieve. We also find ourselves limited by reality. We have to make money. We have to sustain relationships. And actually, that is a source of great joy in my life. We have to think about the commitments and duties that are put upon us in order to, as I say, enrich the commons and to be a good, upstanding member of society. My week is a busy one. I have a busy job as an assistant principal in a primary school, but I also volunteer, and I also play team sports. All of these things are really important and they're really fulfilling, but they do shorten the amount of time in which I can be focusing on, for example, being intentional, as I'm about to speak about. What we need to do then is have some kind of system in place, something that works to keep us on track, something that holds us accountable, I suppose, to ourselves at least, something which makes sure that the limited amount of time that we have isn't wasted, which is not to say that we need to account for every minute of our day. One of the things that I wanted to mention was the idea of time blocking, something that Cal Newport talks and writes about. Time blocking is the idea that we need to eke out our day into blocks of time to focus on individual tasks or projects, and that works really well when I'm thinking about work, for example. But actually time blocking can be really useful for less structured activities as well. We might say appropriate a block of time for swimming, something that's good and healthy and a good habit, and we know that we should be doing it. We might actually put in a block of time for unstructured time where we're going to allow ourselves to kind of choose and think about activities, and that might sound really counterintuitive, but doing that kind of almost forces us to say Sunday afternoons are my time. They're time where I get to kind of indulge my own passions and pursuits, and they might not necessarily align with our broader goals of making us a better person or living a really fulfilling life. But all of this has to be balanced against pleasure as well. We do need some pleasure and enjoyment in our lives, and I have no problem with facilitating idleness, time for me, for example, in the summer holidays when I'm not working, where I can sit on a cruise ship in the Adriatic and read a book that's completely unrelated to anything that might be useful in my life, and drink a nice cold drink. In fact, Bertrand Russell, one of my favourite philosophers, talks, he has a whole book that's behind me called In Praise of Idleness, where he talks about the joys of that unstructured time. Some people are able to live entire lives of idleness because of, for example, generational wealth. But we need to work so that we can enable that idleness. Efficiency unlocks idleness, and idleness is a great joy. 3 kind of things that I think about when I'm thinking about being efficient. Well, firstly, plan. I'm not a natural planner. I'm not someone who takes it upon themselves to plan in minutiae and thoroughly enjoys that process. I'm someone who needs to be intentional about how I plan my week. So what I do is I have a notebook. I have started to develop a new habit where I'm leaving for work 15 minutes earlier than I would have done. It means that I'm avoiding traffic, which is great. I'm really lucky to work in a school that is right next to the beach. So I've been in the winter taking my notebook and sitting in my car by the beach, and now it's spring and summer. I'm starting to sit on a bench and look out over the sea. And I use that additional 15 minutes that I've kind of eked out in my day to plan my day, or to at least replan my day. So there are lots of things already in my calendar, and I'll write those out into my notebook. There are things that I do all the time. They're on a rota that I will say, okay, well, Monday means that I'm on lunch duty, I'm on call rota for the afternoon, and I need to do the gate. And that's really important, because if I forget to do those things, I'm not a reliable person, and being a person that people can rely on is an important personal goal for me. And then I look at my to-do list from yesterday, and I see the things that I left undone, and I think, will I have any capacity to do those today? And I move them about. I might move them to today, I might move them to next week. And then I kind of have a brief check of my email inbox, and I think, is there anything in here that is really pressing that I need to add to my to-do list? And then I do a little bit of prioritization. I might underline or put a star next to the most important tasks for the day. And again, all of this aligns with my goal of being really good at my job, something that is really, really important to me, to build career capital, to be someone that people rely on, to be someone that doesn't let my team and my school down. Secondly, I think it's really important to be punctual and to build the habits of punctuality. I think that I'm someone who usually arrives to places 5 minutes early. Again, it's not necessarily something that comes naturally to me, but that element of planning allows me to predict what my day is going to look like. So if I know that I have to, for example, be playing in a touch rugby tournament on Friday after work, then I'll be able to kind of plan backwards and know, okay, well then I need to be leaving work 45 minutes beforehand, then I need to not be planning a meeting that is going to run over. I need to make sure that last half an hour of my working day is protected time for me to close down anything on a Friday that I don't want to work on over the weekend. And all of that is intentionality. All of that is being really purposeful. I hate surprises around my week. There are loads of them. They come at you from all different angles. The more organised and efficient we are on a day-to-day basis, the better equipped we are to deal with all of the curveballs that come our way. And most importantly, doing all of this enables to focus on the other 2 elements that I think lead to a life well spent, a life of flourishing, a life of opportunity. So let's move on to talking about intention. Let's talk about intentionality. I think it is a really game-changing concept. The idea of doing things intentionally rather than automatically is something that I first came across kind of a few years ago when I started reading about digital minimalism, and it's something that has really stuck with me, and something that I think about like every single day. Am I doing this because I want to do it, because it aligns with what I'm trying to achieve in life, or am I doing this because it's easy, because it's going to give me immediate pleasure, because it's the thing that I always do? There's a great quote. So this is a really nice book. It's called The Intentional Year. It is a book that's aimed at Christians, but it's all about how we can use the pattern of the seasons and of the Christian year to really focus on a life that's full of intentionality rather than accident. Holly Packiam is one of the authors of this book, and she says, if there's one thing that any farmer knows, it's that stuff doesn't grow on its own. Well, let me rephrase that. Some stuff grows on its own, just not the stuff you want. Weeds run amok with little human aid, but to grow the crops you want, you've got to be intentional. And it's so true. It's not as if we weren't intentional about what we were doing, we would just, lie on our bed staring at space the entire time. We would still fill our time with things. We would still find ways to be efficient, even if we weren't doing things that were particularly fulfilling. Like, I know my kind of default mode would probably be to just lie on my bed watching YouTube on a day off. And I'm not saying we can't do that. Like, when I'm talking about planning in time for idleness, that's kind of one of the things that I do want to have time to do. I do enjoy that. But ultimately, doing that for 7 hours is not going to lead to us living a fulfilling life. Instead, we need to intentionally think about what we are aiming towards. And this leads me to a big conflict that I think sits at the heart of the formula that I'm trying to put forward here. And here we come across a central conflict in this formula. The intention part is about having a main thing, about setting a goal and a direction in life that we think is going to lead to that purpose and fulfillment. And I think it's important for us to have one, maybe two, maybe three, but definitely one main thing that we do with our lives. For me, that's my job. It's working in education, it's being an assistant principal, and further down the line progressing through that career. It is something that gives me an absolutely tremendous amount of joy and purpose, but it is also something that is really difficult and takes up absolutely enormous portions of my time. The attention part that I'm going to speak to later is more about how we develop a variety of different interests which feed into that main goal or purpose. It's about making sure that we're not just focused on one singular thing to the exclusion of all others. One note of caution here is that finding the main thing is not necessarily going to be the same as finding what your passion is. For me, if I'd followed my passion from a young age, I probably wouldn't be anywhere near as happy and comfortable as I am now. Passions don't necessarily translate into good careers. They don't necessarily translate into purposeful and meaningful work. They can lead us down the wrong path. And Cal Newport, writing in So Good They Can't Ignore You, a book that's all about developing a really good and purposeful career, talks about the passion hypothesis, the idea that people get told when they're in high school or university, follow your passion, do what you find most interesting, that gives you the most personal reward, and somehow everything will fall into place afterwards. And he argues that that's not necessarily going to be the case. There doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that is really good advice for us to give to young people as they grow up. Instead, he argues we should think about what we're good at, what we're naturally suited to, what's open to us. If we can answer those three questions, we're much more likely to be able to find something, a job, a purpose, a career, a vocation that is going to satisfy us in the long term, and that is also going to provide us with the stability that we've talked about already in the efficiency part of this, that stability that unlocks the ability to live a life of great flourishing. He says that the traits that make for good work don't tend to match to pre-existing passions. Instead, they're more general. They tend to be agnostic to the type of work that we're doing, and they're more linked to the idea of mastering the thing that we're doing. Satisfaction in our job, in our career, comes much more through competence and through being good at what we do than it does through pursuing some kind of ethereal passion that we want to see through to its end. I would argue that autonomy comes through competence. The more competent we are, to use Cal Newport's phrase, the more career capital that we build, the better we get, the more desirable we become, and the more choice and opportunity we have before us. We are able to relate to other people better in our profession. We're able to share our knowledge to become an expert. And honestly, doing that as a teacher and moving through into senior leadership and having the opportunity to share what I know about education with other people has been one of the greatest joys of my life. To be part of that community of teachers who are seeking to improve, whether that's in my own school or in the wider educational community, is something that gives me an enormous sense of fulfillment, and that has come through mastery, through putting in the hours, through going to work every day and trying to be a better teacher, to reading and working sometimes late into the day. It is difficult, but it is good and it is fulfilling. In the book Grit, Angela Duckworth introduces this artist, Jane Golden. She's a public artist. She's worked on murals in Philadelphia, and she is someone who really has a main thing. She is one of the most prolific public artists and mural painters in America. She has 3,600 murals to her name. She's given her entire life to one big idea. And she argues that I've spent a long time in my life pursuing lots of different hobbies, and I don't have any problem with that. I enjoy picking something up, trying it out, putting it down and picking something new up. We all love novelty. We're all neophiles at heart. But she argues that when she comes across these kind of people in her professional life, she thinks of them as short-termers. She doesn't really understand the mindset that they have, where they want to pick something up, try it out and drop it again. For her, she comes from a different perspective. Public art, murals, this is her thing. This is what she does. She steadily moves towards her goal of creating incredible public art. She argues that what we need is a balance between novelty and consistency. If our life is just novelty, then we will never be able to achieve the main thing. We'll never get that competence and mastery at a single thing. But obviously we need to combine that with novelty, and when I talk about attention, I'll talk about the different ways which we can bring things into our main thing, or that we can branch off from our main thing in order to live a life of joy and fulfillment. She argues that she gains a richness through mastering her main thing. She talks about how she's like an artist who looks at the sky every morning and sees a variety of really brilliant colours where other people would just see blue or grey. Seeing in the course of a single day this tremendous complexity and nuance, she sees something that is ever evolving and rich. I think what it is that Jane Goldman has found is a sense of depth. She has developed a great mastery that has enabled her to have a certain autonomy and worldview, which is all focused on a really, really deep knowledge and understanding of the world of public art. I would say that we need to combine that search for depth with a search for breadth as well. It has to be a balance between the two. If I just focused on my teaching practice, I don't think that I would be living the life that I'm seeking. I don't think I would have the richness and variety that might go along with the fulfillment and sense of purpose that I get from my job. That leads us quite neatly onto the third part of this formula. So we've had efficiency, we've had intentionality, discovering what the main thing is. And the third part is all about developing breadth. It's about paying attention. If we take our main thing and we add to it attention and interest in the world around us, then we begin to develop the breadth that is going to distinguish us from other people, make us more interesting, and allow us to lead a life full of variety. In addition to delving deep into whatever our chosen main thing is, we also want to seek out inspiration and influences that are far away from the thing that we might be working on. By doing that, we will really distinguish ourselves as someone with a different and creative approach to the thing that we're trying to achieve. I have a little example of this, which is a tiny bit nerdy, but I think it's illustrating the point that I want to make. I love flight simming. I love to get home from work and fly like an Airbus A320 across Europe. It's really fun and really engaging. But I wouldn't say there was a natural connection between my flight simming hobby and my job as an assistant principal. But then I started to think about it on the way to work the other day, and I actually thought there are a few different things that I do at work which have been directly influenced by it. I mean, the first thing is probably the most obvious, and that's my kind of slight obsession with checklists and playbooks, and the idea that when you're flying an aeroplane, it's such an incredibly cognitively taxing and complex task that pilots use these very, very consistent checklists to ensure that every time they are taking off, landing, taxiing, whatever it is, they are always going to hit every single part. They're never having to rely on their memory. They're never having to rely on their professional expertise. The taxing part of that is taken away from them, and I do that at work. I have playbooks that I use where I write out every single thing that needs to happen in order, for example, to run a parents' evening, and then we follow that through every single time, and it just makes sure that we're not missing things, even though I could probably do that without a list. I could probably do it without a checklist, but just having it there takes away that really difficult process of trying to hold everything in your head. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that commercial pilots will have a pre-briefing before they do anything. Again, the actual process of flying is so demanding that they need to be fully prepared before they go into it. So they'll meet beforehand and they'll look at weather, they'll look at notices, different information about the airports that they're flying to, they'll look at their plan and their secondary plan, they'll look at any potential pitfalls, and they'll talk through, well, if this happens, if we have an engine failure, then this is what I'm going to do, and if I need to abort the landing, then this is what I'm going to do. And in doing so, they they are as well prepared as it's possible to be for getting into that cockpit and being able to fly. And we've started doing this at work as well. We've started having an 8 a.m. Operational briefing before the children arrive, just as the teachers are getting there, with the senior leadership team meeting together to think really clearly, basically, about what the day is going to look like. We talk through from 8 a.m. until everyone goes home, what needs to happen in order for it to be successful, who's going to be where, making sure that everything is covered, every gate is being opened, there's always someone on call, all of our staff absence is covered. And it's tremendously helpful, because I still think we'd be able to run a successful school without that, but doing that just takes so much of the cognitive load off ourselves. And lastly, there's this idea in flying that, particularly with a commercial airliner, when you're coming into land, you need to be in a fully stabilized approach before you land. You have to make sure that your flaps are in the right position, that you're not being buffeted about by the wind, that you don't need to make any massive adjustments on the final approach to the runway. And I've begun to think about this as we implement new projects, like bringing in coaching at work. If we're approaching the launch of that and we're not fully established and we haven't laid the groundworks properly, then we are going to perform a go around. We are going to take off, we're going to circle back, and we're going to try coming into land again, because it is far too risky. The moment that the rubber hits the runway, the moment that we launch that project in front of all of our teachers, that is a really high risk moment. And if we're not stabilised on the approach to that, then we are going to find it really difficult. Now, these analogies, they might be cheesy, they might be nerdy, but I don't think these thoughts would have clarified in quite the same way if I wasn't able to link my completely unrelated hobby of flight simulation with my work in school. One of the books that I drew from when I was thinking about this section is the book Do Interesting by Russell Davies. It's one of my favourite books of recent years that looks at different ways we can kind of curate our life and try and make it really interesting. He talked to a photographer called Jim Martin, and Jim Martin was talking about how he begins working on new projects. He says, I start a project, sit down and think about what could connect with it, go back into the references, dredge the swampy canal and see what connects. And that is really a major part of any kind of creative process. Creativity sparks in those connections. When I was going back through my notes to make this video, it wasn't necessarily in the individual insights that I was reading, it was in the connections I was drawing through, from Cal Newport to Russell Davies to Angela Duckworth. It was when I started to see the connections that I was able to come up with a more coherent and hopefully interesting whole. The breadth that we have will supplement the depth. The breadth will be what distinguishes us, and the depth will be what sustains us. The breadth is going to be what makes us stand out from the crowd in the long term, because if I'm giving a talk and I can use these interesting analogies or different examples or draw on something and think in a really lateral, non-linear way, that's going to really benefit me and help me in the main thing. Russell Davies gives some advice which I think is probably directly contradictory to some of the advice that is in Grit. And this is often the case when we engage in the world of self-improvement. We find different writers giving contradictory advice, but it doesn't mean that we can't hold two things at once and find them to be useful. His advice for living a more creative and attention-paying life is to mix things up, to think of different ways to approach things, to pursue multiple interests at once. And I've said that we can do both. We can have the main thing and we can have all these multiple interests. He actually says something that really resonated with me, because it's something I already do. He says it's good to read 6 books at once. And if you've watched my video about Kindle, it's one of the things that really appeals to me about the Kindle is being able to read maybe 2 books on my Kindle, 2 physical books, 2 audiobooks, all at the same time. In doing so, we're naturally going to draw connections between what we're reading in those books, particularly if we're taking notes on some of them. We might see a link between a kind of offhand comment made in a historical novel, a philosophy book we might be reading, a book on AI we might be reading, or an education book. For me, I'm nearly always reading a book that's related to my work, because that's the main thing. But then I might have 4 or 5 different books on the go that are related to a whole massive variety of different things that I like to think and read and pursue. And again, that's richness, that's breadth, but it's also depth, because I'm still committed to learning and improving the main thing in my life. The human brain, Russell Davies argues, is so desperate to find meaning in things that it will make a story out of 2 random things put together. And that's completely true. If I can link being an assistant principal and being an airline pilot, then you can link any two things and make a connection that will be unique and interesting, and something that really only you will be bringing to the table. And so it leads me on to how I like to end these videos, with 3 practical steps for how you can implement this idea into your life. I've chosen to make each of these practical steps directly related to the 3 parts of the formula. So we're going to start with efficiency, and my tip for efficiency is to plan for structured and unstructured time. If we're going to think really carefully about how we want to live our lives, then naturally, probably a lot of our time is going to be structured, and we might say that this is my study time, or this is my work time, or this is my family time. Those things are fairly structured, but by giving us breaks and thinking really carefully about our well-being, we're going to enable us to have the capacity and not burn out to succeed. And also, in those unstructured moments, we're naturally going to come across things that are new and novel and interesting. We're going to follow our desires, and therefore we're going to enrich the structured time. It's a bit like what I talked about with attention, where the breadth that we have is going to supplement the depth. The time that we spend that is unstructured will help to support the time that we spend in structured activities. In my job, I talk a lot about being on rig and off rig, and this is an analogy that uses offshore oil workers. So where I work and where I grew up, a lot of people work offshore on oil rigs. When they fly out on the helicopter to those oil rigs, they're there all day. They have no options for where they go. They can't leave. They work really long shifts, and they work really hard. And the whole time that they're on the rig, they're constantly on call. If there's some kind of problem, they're never fully switched off from work. It's really difficult. However, when they're off rig, they're off rig. They can't be working from home. They can't be thinking really hard about anything that's going on at work. Their emails are not pinging away, and they have long periods of rest in between each shift to enable them to restore themselves. And it helps me to think about my job in similar terms. When it's term time, I'm on rig. I spend a lot of my time thinking about work, working on work. I give a lot of myself to work, but when I'm not there on a Sunday or in the holidays, I really make an effort to disconnect and to be off rig. I make it really clear to my colleagues that I'm not going to answer their emails over the half-term holiday. I go off in a week or so. I'm off to Helsinki and Riga to literally separate myself by 1,000 miles from the concerns of work. And this thinking is helpful for our main thing as well. We want to plan in time where we're on rig and fully committed, and some time to rest and recover and restore ourselves. In terms of the main thing, in terms of our intention, I want to think about how we can cultivate competence and get better. One thing that I do that I find really helpful is to keep a feedback log. When people come back to me and they give me positive feedback, then I log it in my feedback log, because that's really nice. And when people come back to me with difficult feedback or constructive feedback, in the past I found that really difficult, and then I realized that obviously every time that happens, I'm learning something new, I'm developing, I'm gaining competency. So I started to log all of those things, and I log it, and then next to it I put how I'm going to do things differently next time. And I found that to be a really tremendous driver of professional change and improvement. And if you apply that kind of feedback loop to your main thing, whatever it is, then you will find that as you are making a really intentional effort to grow, making a really intentional effort to develop and improve yourself, others will begin to notice. They'll say, oh, it's brilliant. I asked you not to do this thing and you haven't done it again. Oh, it's fantastic. The presentation you gave was so much better because when I asked you to do X, you did X. And it's a really, really useful way to build knowledge, to build schema within our heads, to build mental models of success if we are really conscious about acting on the feedback that we're given. And lastly, for attention, one of the things that Russell Davies in his book Do Interesting is really focused on is building collections in our lives. I've talked previously in my Art of Noticing video about scrapbooks and commonplace books and having collections, and they have helped me so much in putting this video, and in fact all of my videos, together, because having things in one place, I can go draw things together and use them. It is transformational, especially if you're someone who hasn't done that before. You're suddenly going to be starting to build this really rich, really deep, really broad collection of different interesting things. It doesn't have to be a really systematized approach. You don't have to be using Notion to do this. You don't have to be having 27 different notebooks. To start, You literally just need one notebook, one folder on your computer, one scrapbook, and you can go off and start making these collections that are going to crystallize your intellectual life into something that's really interesting and rewarding. I really hope that you've enjoyed the video today and that you found it interesting. This is something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. I don't think I have it all figured out. I'm happy with my life, and I think that's probably the best endorsement that I can give at the moment, that I've thought really hard about these things, implemented them in my own life, and seen really positive results. But I'd be really happy to hear from you as well, whether this has challenged you or whether it's something that already aligns with your thoughts. It is always a pleasure to speak to you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye.